Former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, appeared on The View, and I really want you to watch and listen to this 2 minutes from it, and then we'll discuss. And it pertains to the violent attack of her husband, Paul Pelosi, some time ago. And remember, there was this right-wing lunatic broke into the house looking for Nancy Pelosi, saying he wanted to tie her up and make her answer for her crimes. And then she wasn't there, but her husband, Paul Pelosi, was an elderly man. And then with a hammer, the attacker, bludgeoned in the head of Paul Pelosi. And to this day, as you're going to hear, he's still recovering. Yes, physically, but also just the trauma that comes along with that. Here it is, then we'll talk about the political part of this.
This is a family affair for us.
It's great, and the book is extraordinary because you dedicated this book to your husband, Paul, and we haven't really gotten a chance to see you since the horrific attack on him at your home in San Francisco, nearly almost 2 years now. How is Paul doing, and how's the family doing?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for asking. He's doing okay. He's coming along. A little more time. Getting hit on the head 3 times is
with a hammer.
Horrible thing. And that was physical, but the traumatic effect for him, for us, for the family, but also for other political families as well, just families in America. Violence has no place in any resolution of any discussion you may have. So again, what was sad though, Wolfie, was that it was horrible. It was horrible when it happened. It was horrible. We didn't even know if he was alive when we first heard about the attack. But before you could even say anything, your friend, who shall remain nameless, he was on there making a joke of it, and people were laughing, and his family was making a joke, and Republican governor making jokes and that, and that's just horrible.
Sick.
It's sick. It's really sick. Even as recently as one of his speeches the other day, he said she has a wall around her. We don't have a wall around our house. He's always projecting. He probably has a wall around his house. We don't have one around our house, and that didn't help her out there very much, to make a joke of that, and then they laughed at that. So that the trauma of it all is not just the physical, but the impact of the rest of it. But thank you for asking. Well, he'll see, so he'll be
And any time Donald Trump attacks you or your family, you wear it as a badge of honor.
Of course.
Well, Madam Speaker.
Okay, so this is one of those things that can really send me off the rails because of how the word that was used there was absolutely spot on. Sick. It's just sick and depraved what we've seen from MAGA in response to this attack. A point, I'll show you this when I made it on Piers Morgan's show later in the segment after I show you the clips that were being referenced there. But a point that I made before is, while of course you have online people across the political spectrum who, no matter what happens, will say the most deranged stuff. Okay, so yes. Because MAGA will say, no, people made jokes about the Trump assassination attempt too, but they're referencing online people. That's disgusting. No one should joke about that. But that's different than what the framework was I set up in many arguments is essentially think about the people in positions of power, and that gives you a big sense of the 2 different parties we have, the 2 major parties in this country. Both imperfect, but very different, and one is far, far worse. And one of the examples of that is how leaders in either party will react to political violence. Every single prominent Democrat, person in a position of power, when the assassination attempt happened against Trump, denounced it as they should and wants justice. One of the examples we've talked about before of the opposite not being true is Paul Pelosi. When he's attacked, instantly, and I'll read these out in more detail in a little bit, but instantly jokes were made about it. And to this day, a couple days ago, Trump's still joking about Paul Pelosi nearly being killed by having his head cracked, bashed in, as I'm pretty sure an 80-plus-year-old gentleman. Here was a time in Anaheim, California, a while ago that he said this. Then we'll look at the most recent example.
And we'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi, who ruined San Francisco.
This is right after the attack.
How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know? And she's against building a wall at our border, even though she has a wall around her house. which obviously didn't do a very good job.
You know when you look at another human and you think, how can we be a part of the same species? How is that how can you have the same basic value? You don't have the same values. How can you be of the same world? Who would say that? Then, in North Carolina over this weekend, he said this.
Force anarchy on the American people while they live in safety, in many cases behind walls. You know that? Nancy Pelosi has a big wall wrapped around her house. Of course, it didn't help too much with the problem she had, did it? But she had a big wall wrapped around her house. But then she says, we don't want to, you have no idea.
So apparently she doesn't have a wall, but it's sick that he makes that joke. And then the crowd laughs. Someone named Aiden McLaughlin said the cruel irony of Trump mocking Paul Pelosi is that the reason he was nearly beaten to death in the first place is because Trump lied that the 2020 election was stolen. DePape answers, this is from the conversation with police officers, absolutely. He grows increasingly angry and emotional, claiming that Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats committed crimes to steal the election from Donald Trump. Then DePape says, I was going to hold her hostage and get her to tell the truth. If she didn't tell the truth, I'd break her kneecaps. DePape being the attacker. Trump's lies about the election led to this guy wanting to hold accountable Nancy Pelosi for her crimes. And that led to, for the rest of his life, he's going to be traumatized, Paul Pelosi, that is, by what happened. And then again, as we've said with the assassination attempt against Trump, it just so happens we've learned more that it was a registered Republican. He was looking for different politicians of different political ideologies, less so a politically motivated attack and more so seeking some demented form of notoriety. But even so, right when it happened, and the assumption for a lot of people as well, it must have been a left-winger, a point we've talked about is when a deranged person does something, it doesn't necessarily mean that us making points about Trump being a threat to democracy aren't correct or need to stop. The deranged person needs to be held accountable, and that act should be denounced completely. And so with this, it's one thing for Trump's statements, because they'll say, well, your statements led to the Trump thing. It didn't technically, but even if the threat to democracy thing did lead to a deranged person attacking Trump, still we can say derangement led to this. And you can't just say it was people's statements, but it's one thing for the lies to lead to something in the case of Trump. It's a whole nother thing for him to then on the other side of it, seeing what happened because of his lies, to joke about it as a person in a position of power. Something you don't see in Democratic politics about the assassination attempt against Trump. And right after the assassination attempt against Trump, you might remember I appeared on Piers Morgan's show with a guy named CJ Pearson, who's a big Trump person. And here was my sort of closing statement after our debate.
I'll give the final word to Luke on that.
Yeah, I think Piers and the audience, what you're seeing is a big difference between the pro-democracy movement right now represented by the Democratic Party with its flaws and this current MAGA ideology. When someone who I've spent every day talking about the flaws of being Trump, when someone such as him is attacked, universally, people in positions of power, elected Democrats, are able to recognize the attack that was on democracy. And we believe the threat that is posed by the MAGA ideology to democracy should be prevented through democracy, which is why we're against this. And that reaction, Biden denouncing it immediately, wanting this to see justice, comes in stark contrast to the conspiracy theories we heard from elected Republicans, not random people on the internet, post January 6th, what we're hearing here from CJ wanting to further divide and spread falsehoods, and what we saw in the aftermath of the Paul Pelosi attack. One side incapable of denouncing this sort of violence, the other very able to, and I think that's quite the indictment of the two ideologies.
Okay.
And that right after was something people were grappling with. Gosh, the immediate reaction from prominent elected Democrats is so different to what we saw after political violence like Paul Pelosi, when it's someone being attacked on the left or associated with Democrats. And then to see since this appearance, the development of this and it further being bolstered, that idea, and to see Trump all this time later again mock such a horrific act. When Nancy Pelosi would never dare to mock the attack on him, because we actually do oppose political violence. We actually do want to prevent a threat to democracy through democracy. It doesn't seem like the same number of prominent Republicans are willing to be that clear when the attack happens the other way. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. Support the show by clicking the join button below.